I just want to welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Herman. I'm the Senior Director for Climate Change and Environmental Justice at ICCR, the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. We're just delighted to be co-hosting this event with the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And I want to extend a warm welcome on behalf of both organizations to everyone here in the room and everyone who's online. I want to say just a few words about ICCR, why we're working on this issue of building decarbonization and what we hope to achieve today. For those of you unfamiliar with ICCR, we're a coalition of some 300 faith and values-based institutional investors representing around $4 trillion in assets under management. Our membership spans religious and labor pension funds, as well as the funds of foundations and universities and values-based asset managers. We view shareholder engagement with corporations as a powerful catalyst for change. Our statement, inspired by faith, committed to action, sets forth our pledge to be active owners and to engage meaningfully with the companies in our portfolios, excuse me, through the process of shareholder engagement that we pioneered more than 50 years ago. Our guiding principle as shareholders is that sustainable corporations must look beyond their next earnings report to account for the full impact of their businesses on society, and must view the well-being of all of their stakeholders, including their workers and the communities in which they operate, as integral to their long-term value. In this Climate Week event, we will examine the challenges and opportunities associated with the decarbonization of building, heating, and cooling. Deeply concerned about the climate crisis and the potential cost to society and to investor portfolios, which are many of your retirement funds, from a failure to decarbonize our economy quickly and equitably, ICCR members have been actively engaging the energy utility sector on the need for a just transition for many years. We understand that we cannot continue to burn fossil fuels to heat and cool our buildings, which has led us to explore alternatives such as those that will be discussed today. Investors are increasingly concerned about expensive proposed solutions put forward by major gas utilities to achieve sustainability of their networks and the very real risk of stranded assets from overinvestment in current systems. We view the deployment of non-combusting thermal energy networks as a sensible path forward for workers, communities, companies, and their investors. During this session, we will explore thermal energy alternatives, both as a technology and as an opportunity for workers and communities, especially low-income ratepayers that cannot afford to electrify their homes and risk being left on a shrinking and increasingly expensive gas network. Importantly, we also see thermal energy systems as an opportunity for companies and their investors. Thermal energy networks are an exciting opportunity as they can both help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and offer a sustainable alternative business model for gas utilities. They can also improve grid reliability by reducing the amount of electricity needed to heat and cool our buildings as we decarbonize. ICCR has been interested in the potential offered by thermal energy systems since we first learned about them about 5 years ago. And we're delighted to see the momentum for adoption of network geothermal and other thermal energy systems by energy utilities. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to my colleague, Pedro Glatz, who manages ICCR's Just Transition work and who will introduce our speakers and moderate today's panel. So thank you and welcome again.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, you all, and welcome to the event, Thermal Energy Networks Invest in the Future of Heat. My name is Pedro Glatz, and I'm the Associate Director for Climate Change and Environmental Justice at ICCR. To our audience, both in person and online, thank you so much for coming and joining us. I will moderate today's panel, composed by a fantastic lineup of speakers. I want to start by thanking all presenters for sharing their perspectives and expertise with us today. I'm sure that after today's event, every single person attending today will find at least one reason to become a Thermal Energy Networks fan and advocate. Before I begin with the presentation and turn this over to our panel, I want to offer a few housekeeping points. The webinar will be recorded, and we will send everyone a follow-up email with a link to this recording. For our Zoom audience, you will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar, and we will take time at the end of the round of presentation for Q&A. So please enter your questions for the current speaker in the questions box. For the speakers, each of you will have 12 minutes to make a presentation, and I will give you a 3-minute and a 1-minute notice before your time is up. We want to open the floor for questions, so let's try to keep it within the 12-minute limit. After that, around 4 p.m., we'll switch to a Q&A moment where we will be sitting down there, so then we can have a conversation, and we'll collect questions from the audience. A few of our colleagues will be with the mics, and also read some questions that will come through the Zoom. So now let me introduce you to today's panel. First, we have here Ania Camargo Cortez, who is a Thermal Network Senior Manager at our co-host, the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Yeah. You can give an applause, please. I know, it was... So second, Mike Rolls, Executive Director for Climate Jobs coming from Rhode Island. Thanks, Mike, for coming. And we also have Brittany Provencher, who is a Clean Engineering Manager from Con Edison. Thank you, Brittany, for joining us. And finally, we have Amy Orr, who is a Director of U.S. Shareholder Engagement at Boston Common Asset Management. Thank you, Amy. So without further ado, Ania, your turn.
Great. Thank you so much, Pedro. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Pedro said, I'm Ania Camargo Cortez, and I'm going to be talking about the future of heat. You can use the keyboard. Okay. There we go. Okay. All right. Great. So I'm talking about the future of heat and the really important role gas utilities can play in a safe and just transition. So first, a little bit about our organization. The Building Decarbonization Coalition is a national nonprofit that brings together stakeholders to decarbonize buildings. And we work really closely with HEAT, which is a small nonprofit in Massachusetts that first came up with the idea of thermal networks for gas utilities. So let's start with the big picture. Our country is trying to decarbonize. The states in light blue have climate commitment reductions of 75% or more by 2050 and greening the grid. And to give you a context, in order to do this, you have to take on buildings because they're about 1/3 of our emissions. So the primary strategy for decarbonizing buildings right now nationally is having buildings that heat with gas and with oil transition to electricity with air source heat pumps. And you can see here, last year at Climate Week, 25 governors, part of the US Climate Alliance, pledged to quadruple the number of heat pumps to 20 million by 2030. And air source heat pumps are fantastic. They provide both heating and cooling, and they're 3 times more efficient than gas. And so for an individual household, they're great. But for a system, it has major implications. So just to give you a sense, here's a neighborhood. Imagine this neighborhood is all on gas. There's tons of incentives for you to transition to heat pumps, so people start doing that. And what happens is that the more and more homes get off the gas system and electrify, what happens? There are fewer and fewer customers to pay for the whole fixed cost of the gas system. So that has a huge cost implication. The cost of gas the price of gas for customers will go up and up. And that's a negative feedback loop that causes more people to leave the system. In the end, the only people left on the system are the ones who can't afford to transition, and the people who, like, for example, rent, so they don't have the power to transition to electric. So this is an enormous equity issue, and also a big concern for gas utilities. So we at the Building Decarbonization Coalition advocate, instead of this one house at a time, how about we do whole neighborhoods at a time? And that way we can have a phased, managed transition instead of this one house at a time approach. And one of the ways to do whole neighborhoods at a time is with thermal energy networks. That is an umbrella term for connecting buildings to share heating and cooling with a pipe filled with a non-combusting fluid such as water. And we here have a picture of a geothermal network, which is the most efficient design, and what we would advocate for utility companies because it can expand and grow over time, and so they can map it onto the gas system. And so just to explain here, that purple pipe in the middle, it's instead of a gas pipe, you would have a water pipe. Instead of a furnace in your building, you would have a ground source heat pump, and you would have shallow boreholes, or you could have a river or the ocean, but basically some place to store the energy, probably 200 to 1,000 feet, so that's shallow. Many of you think of geothermal, and you think of Iceland. That's geothermal power, and that is about 8,000 feet, so really these are very shallow. So this is how it works. You can imagine that water pipe down the middle of the street. That tall building there could be a data center, and data centers always want cooling. And so what they do for cooling is that they're rejecting heat. That rejected heat can then travel down the street and heat all the buildings down the street. In the summer, nobody wants heat, so all of the homes with their pumps, heat pumps, can reject their heat into the boreholes, into the ground, and then when it's cold again, that heat can be used to heat the buildings. So in this case, you're not creating any energy, you're just transferring it from buildings to each other and from the ground to the buildings, and you're using the earth as a battery. The 55 degrees there is because the subsurface of the earth is a constant temperature. Here in New York and Massachusetts, it's around 55 degrees, and this allows the system to be really efficient. So that's big picture how it works. Now I'm going to transition into scale and why scale really matters versus the one house approach. So when you transition a whole neighborhood at the same time, you get some incredible system benefits that we have to consider in this transition. And so here's the three I'm going to get into, and I'll start with equitable and affordable. We just talked about equitable. When you do this at scale, you can take a whole neighborhood, whether people rent or not, or whether they're high income or low income. In addition, in terms of affordability, there's not a lot of data because we only have one system that's gone live, but there's some studies that have looked at this, and they're estimating that our bills are going to be going down, and that the energy burden, this study was done by E3 for Massachusetts Future of Gas Proceeding, hired by gas utilities, and it found that the building-by-building approach has the worst energy burden, and the gas to geothermal systems has the best, the lowest energy burden. And it kind of makes sense, because when you use these systems, you get rid of gas. And so remember, half of your bill is usually gas and half infrastructure. The gas part is gone. And then these systems are incredibly efficient. So you're using very little electricity. These are about 600% more efficient than gas systems. And so that efficiency also has electric implications. Here is a map that shows basically January through December, all of our electric demand for the whole country. And you can notice in the summer, we have summer peak, and our electric grid is built to that peak. So, or else we'll have blackouts. So the question is, if over half of our buildings are currently being heated with gas and oil and propane, what's going to happen if all those homes become electric? How much are we going to have to build out the grid? And that's where efficiency really matters. And so this is a busy slide, but you can see on the left, if we were to transition all homes with resistance heat, which we'll never do, but it's inefficient, we'd have to more than triple our electric capacity. If you do it with air source, it's better, ground source better. And then if you do this with network geo, where the efficiency is about 6, you flatten the grid, and that it translates into an enormous amount of money because you're not having to build the distribution, the generation, the substations, any of it. Just for ground source heat pumps, the Department of Energy calculated that the mass installation of ground source heat pumps would save us trillions of dollars. So that's on the electric side. And then, we are getting into this because of emissions. So when you transition, there's no on-site combustion. with these units. It is only emissions are associated with the electricity, the tiny bit of electricity to operate the heat pump. And as the electricity greens, you're greening everyone who's on these systems, so that by 2050, it's just whatever the electricity, however much emissions are associated with your electricity is what these systems would have. Okay, gas, why gas utilities? This is a question I get often. The answer is a lot of others are doing it. There are over 50 college campuses that have done this transition. There are private developers, there are communities. But gas utilities are really important because if we electrified every building and did nothing with the gas system, we would still have millions of miles of gas pipe under our streets with a very powerful greenhouse gas with a future shrinking customer base. So a major problem. We have to take this on. Here is the reason for why we need this safe and managed transition. Here's a map of Massachusetts. This is utility reported data with where they plan to replace gas pipe in the next 5 years. All right, so gas pipe with new gas pipe at an enormous cost. On the right, you can see some economic analysis that have been done that estimate what's the cost to ratepayers that were to make these replacements. And you can see they're in the billions, and nationally, it's about $740 billion over the next 15 years. So the question is, wouldn't it be so much better to replace our gas pipe with water pipe? And this is also like from a safety perspective, just think of that, which is this is carrying an explosive gas. And so we actually can't just think about the electric side. We have to think about how are we going to transition and decommission these pipes. And the gas utilities are the ones that have the expertise to do this, which brings me to the labor force. This is a really important path for existing utility workers into the green economy. The gas pipes and the water pipes for thermal networks are practically identical. And the utility workers have all of the skills they need to do this. They require minimal training, and we could do this at scale pretty quickly. Same with HVAC technicians, could install ground source heat pumps. And Mike will talk a lot more about this, but this is where our labor unions are a huge asset because they have the infrastructure, the training capacities to really be able to do this transition at the scale and speed and also the quality that we need to be able to do this. We can't just get people off the street to do this. So this is where we are really teaming up with our unions to do this. And the utility business model. Like the question is, well, do utilities want to do this? It's actually super similar business model. It's very capital intensive. And instead of investing in gas pipe that could become a stranded asset, they're investing in really the clean energy future that we're asking for. It's hyper-local. You don't have to import the gas from another state. And that also means that there's no price volatility because you know the prices and it's just water. And safe, not explosive. And on the resilient front, it's islandable. So we had a delegation from Ukraine last week in Boston, and they wanted to know if you bombed it, can you shut it off? And you absolutely can, which you can't do with the gas system. It's also year-round heating and cooling, and probably more heating coming up. And then finally, there's some really great federal and state incentives. Federally, the IRA for these systems, it's like a 30 to 50% investor tax credit. So anyone in the country can do this except for gas utilities because they are only legally allowed to sell gas. They are regulated entities, and so we have to pass legislation. So far, 7 states have passed. I've included California, but the governor has not signed. And Minnesota and Massachusetts passed just a little law that allowed piloting. New York had an amazing coalition that came together to not only mandate that the largest gas utilities had to file 1 to 5 pilots, but they also put in some really good labor provisions and equity provisions. And then the rest of the states learned a lot from New York and tried to incorporate all those provisions and then tailor them to their state. And utilities are super interested. This map shows the dark color is at least 1 utility in every one of these states as part of the Utility Net Geo Collaborative, and they're exploring the business model and how they would do this. And then the light blue are states that have already filed pilots. There are 21 filed utility pilots right now in the country. And I want to end with this slide, which is there's a pilot that's live. I went live on June 4th in Framingham, Massachusetts. It's the first utility pilot in the country. It's an environmental justice community, 37 buildings. You see the green loop there? It's a mile long. It has 140 customers and converted whatever the source people had, gas, oil, or electric. Offices, businesses, a school. My favorite thing is it has a fire station and a gas station. And then, of course, the costs to the customers are very low because we're doing this at a utility scale, the cost can be spread across all customers and across time. And so far, it's been a huge success, and the customers are really happy. We wrote a paper on this if you want to learn more, and here's our information on how to reach us, and thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thermal energy networks are good for local jobs, local economies, and I'm going to tell you why. My name is Mike Rolls. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. We are a coalition of, we are a coalition of 30 environmental organizations, labor unions, and community organizations. We've been around for about 3 years, working toward a just transition to meet our state's Act on Climate goals, which call for net zero emissions by 2050. We are very centered in the principles and how we do our work. It's a very bottom-up approach, starting with solutions that are developed by frontline communities and frontline workers. And really, it can be summarized into this Venn diagram: climate, jobs, and justice. So when we're looking at policy solutions, we're asking the questions of, does it meet our Act on Climate goals to the scale that science demands? Does it invest in local economies? And does it create the sort of community-based wealth through good jobs that it needs to? And Thermal Energy Networks, frankly, does. We are part of a national network that folks might be familiar with, the Climate Jobs National Resource Center, represented by these states up here so far, and they're growing. We are we get technical support from folks at the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University, which is based at the Manhattan campus here. So real quick, this is a bit of the landscape of the energy transition we're facing in Rhode Island. Starting with the 2021 Act on Climate, I talked a little bit about it. We have a mandate to get to net zero emissions by 2050. Our first benchmark is in 2030, which is a 45% below 1990 levels, and then 2040 benchmark at 80%. I want to focus on the bottom three in blue there. This March, we were able to get an ordinance passed in the city of Providence that requires net zero municipal buildings in the entire city by 2040. And that is because that's a testament to how our organization works in unison with the community members that we comprise of. In Rhode Island, we also have a future gas docket currently going on at our Public Utilities Commission. Currently, they're wrapping up that process right now, and the stakeholder committee, which we're part of at the PUC, is putting together the recommendations right now. And then we also have our current building decarbonization efforts, one of which was a thermal energy network bill that we put in this year. It does need some adjustments, and we are going to be working with our utility this fall, Rhode Island Energy, which actually encompasses the entire state, to work on that bill and amend it and make sure that we're able to move forward with a good solution forward. So there are some challenges and risks to decarbonizing the economy, right? We have a scale that we need to meet that is very large and broad, and there's a rapid pace that we need to do it at. The risks are that we're going to be displacing a lot of really good family-sustaining careers. These are some of the best-paying careers that we have among our labor unions. And also, there's a lot of somewhat gig economy type businesses that are taking advantage of the net zero economy, that are coming in, paying very substandard wages, and in some cases, poverty wages, and also misclassifying workers, which is a real problem in Rhode Island. And people are actually facing instances of wage theft as well in those jobs. So we need to avoid that to the best we can. And the way we do that is to build up this economy from the bottom up and the middle out. And that means making sure that we're centering the folks who are closest to the problem. And that includes workers on the front lines. That includes communities who are facing high costs, who really need to be uplifted. Rising tide lifts all boats. So why unions? Well, working with unions is really good for business and really good for the economy. They give important voice to workers and power to workers, but also they set the gold standard for safety and skills training and certification. And they have the apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs that we need at the scale that we need to be able to do the new technologies that we can. There are a lot of transferable skills available, as Ania pointed out, in thermal energy networks specifically. And the great thing about our union apprenticeship programs and our pre-apprenticeship programs, they're taking in folks from the community all the time. They're giving them the best certification, they're giving them the best training, and they're able to actually, become gateways and pathways into those family-sustaining careers. And they can pivot on a moment's notice given the policy signals and the market signals. So when they see a market signal for thermal energy networks, you can guarantee the Plumbers and Pipefitters Union is going to expand their class size. You can guarantee Building Futures in Rhode Island is going to expand their class size in their pre-apprenticeship program. That is going to be a pathway into those union careers. And that's an important thing to know when thinking about how we prepare the workforce. It's the union apprenticeships that are best equipped to do this. And also, they're going to be able to provide those pathways to family-sustaining careers for people who are experiencing poverty at the moment. I can tell you one example. Someone got a union career in clean energy. He was confronting poverty. It was hard for him to afford his own home at the beginning. He was almost homeless. And with a good paying career, he was able to buy his first home at a clean energy project in Rhode Island. And that's the kind of story that is waiting to happen in Rhode Island with further investments and things like this. Project labor agreements. How many people know what project labor agreements are? Great. So project labor agreements are a one-stop way to ensure that the work is going to get done on time, on budget, and done right. And so that's an important way to ensure that people are using the best skills and certification, that the people on the job are getting those family-sustaining careers, and that the work is staying local, and that money is then reinvested in the local community because those workers are local. I'm happy to answer any questions after this about project labor agreements. So, the lens that comes from unions on thermal energy networks, there are really three that I thought of. One is the transferable skills piece, right? We have utility workers, we have people in the gas system, people who are, not only doing new construction for gas pipes, but also people who are maintaining those gas pipes. Those are all people that will be able to do thermal energy networks like this. It's the same exact kind of skills, it's the same kind of licenses, and it's the same kind of certifications. Those people can easily go right into that. The other thing is that those people will not be displaced with other electrification projects. So thermal energy networks is the one biggest hope we have to ensure that those workers are not displaced and don't lose those good paying careers, that those careers are able to go into this new technology and do the work that they need to do and keep that money, keep the roof over their head, and as we say in the union movement, have their bread and roses too. And the other piece is the workforce ready. I talked a little bit about that. We've got the union apprenticeship programs ready to roll. We've got the pre-apprenticeship programs. And again, it's the gold standard for safety and licensing. But the other important piece that people don't think about is that unions in the trades especially are very effective messengers with their employers and their contractors and subcontractors. And so when people are thinking about the fact that contractors in Rhode Island or in the Northeast don't have much experience doing drilling, for example, because we don't have gas and oil fields up here, what can happen is those trades can explain the market and the policy and the actual literal nuts and bolts that go into that work to explain to them how they can get into that market and the fact that they are prepared to do that work. And so that's a very important thing to think about when considering whether or not that the economy and the industry is ready to go into this technology. The unions in the trades have a very important role in expressing that message and explaining to their employers exactly how to do it and get into the market and get ready for it. And then the other piece is just transition, justice, equity in our communities. And thermal energy networks provide the scale, as Ania was talking about, that we need, not only for consumers, but also for workers. And it's an important thing to think about when we're thinking about large-scale projects, opening up doors for new people into these careers that don't have that door open available right now. When you see the apprenticeship classes grow, you'll see more people, especially people who come right from the front lines, people who are experiencing poverty, people of color, who really need that kind of leg up. they'll be able to get into those programs, and it's really those market signals and the policy signals that these apprenticeship programs need to see in order to be able to expand that opportunity. Just one quick hit is, before I wrap up, in Rhode Island, a consulting firm did an analysis of the apprenticeship programs in our region, and they found that the union apprenticeship programs are actually more diverse than the non-union apprenticeship programs, and that was an important takeaway for that consultant. So I'll just, this is a quick slide of a lot of the players. These are many of the unions that are involved in the gas sector, many of the ones who have work equity. These are the same folks that would be able to do thermal energy networks. You've got the plumbers and pipe fitters union, you've got the laborers, the utility workers, the steel workers, you've got the operating engineers, and right dead center in the bottom is our local pre-apprenticeship program. I consider it like the world-class pre-apprenticeship program. I think it's the best. I'm not biased at all in the country. But I'm happy to answer any questions afterward, and thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Preventure, and I am an engineering manager on Con Edison's Utility Thermal Energy Networks team, or UTEN for short. Today, I'm going to talk to you about New York State's Utility Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, or UTENJA for short, Con Edison's 3 pilot projects, and what UTENs are. So, what is a UTEN? Ania kind of gave an explanation earlier, but just to elaborate that on a little bit, it's essentially a large network of pipes underground filled with a water-based fluid, and heat is transferred in between buildings to provide heating, cooling, and/or domestic hot water to customers. There are a lot of different thermal sources and heat sinks in thermal energy networks, and we already talked about geothermal, how it can be both heat source and heat sink in order to heat up the fluid or cool down the fluid to provide heating or cooling to customers. But one of the heat sources that we are concerned with is data centers. So data centers provides a constant source of reliable heat year-round, just like, when a computer's on for a long time, it gets hot. Data centers get really hot. So we can capture that heat and put it into UTEN for a reliable source of heat that we can use to provide heating to customers connected to the network. Some other sources of heat are condenser waters from large buildings, chilled water plants, and sewage heat exchange. So some common heat sinks are large open bodies of water like rivers, but more commonly, we're kind of concerned with mechanical cooling equipment like cooling towers in order to cool down the fluid. So a customer would connect to the network by a heat pump, and then the heat pump would extract heat from the UTEN in order to provide space heating and/or domestic hot water to the building. And then to provide cooling, if it's at an ambient temperature, like 60, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or even a little lower than that, then you can extract heat from a building, put it into UTEN, and then it will provide space cooling for a building. So the reason why I'm here today is because of the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act that New York State passed into law in 2022. So the main outcome from that is that it required the 7 biggest utilities of New York State to propose at least one pilot project to our regulators, the Public Service Commission of New York. So some drivers behind this law that was passed is to give the state another tool in order to help achieve its aggressive decarbonization goals by 2050. Building emissions is one of the state's largest greenhouse gas emissions contributors, so UTENJA is meant to help buildings electrify to decrease those greenhouse gas emissions. And then as another point that was made earlier is the importance on the workforce creation and workforce training for the upcoming natural gas transition. Another thing that will be tested out by these thermal energy network pilot projects is to test out if we can really help customers electrify in a cost-effective fashion, especially in disadvantaged communities. Disadvantaged communities are meant to be in at least one of the pilot projects that a utility proposes to the Public Service Commission. So on this slide is the regulated process that each utility in New York State has to go through for its U10 pilot projects. So stage one was basically just the state says, here's the minimum information that we need if you are interested in pursuing a pilot project. So it took a little bit of time for the state to figure out the minimum required amount of information for each pilot project and for us to gather everything on our end. So after you submit a pilot project in stage one, then you have to wait for Department of Public Service staff, DPS staff, in order to issue an approval letter for you to move on to stage two, which is the engineering design phase. So Con Edison received its approval letters for all three of its pilot projects in April of this year, and we were authorized to spend up to 10% of our projected project costs for our three pilot projects, which is around $17 million. So we have 9 months in order to come up with construction-ready drawings and to come up with a customer protection plan for the customers of all of our pilot projects. So after that 9 months, we'll make a filing of all of the required information, and we think that we'll do that in the middle of next year. And then we'll have to wait for a public comment period and for U10s to be added to a monthly public service commission meeting. So then after that meeting, we'll learn which of our pilot projects are approved for construction. And we think we'll know that toward the later part of next year. So once we learn which pilot projects are approved, we'll have to enroll customers, and then we'll start construction. And construction is estimated to take about a year and a half, and then it will start no later than 2026. So once it's constructed, all the pilot projects have to be in operation for 5 years. So we're thinking that that will happen from 27 through 2032. And then after that, we will take everything that we learned, we'll put it in a report, and we'll submit it to the state so the state can be more informed about future regulations for U10s moving forward. So before I talk to you about what each of our pilot projects entail, just wanted to give you a little bit of general information that apply to all three of our projects. So Con Edison purposefully picked our three pilot projects in order to generate the most learnings we possibly can for the state. We have different customer types, different building types, and different thermal energy sources. So Con Edison will own and operate our thermal energy networks. This will be a brand new commodity for Con Edison. So since it's a brand new commodity, we have to come up with brand new innovative rates for each customer. So something that we are keeping in mind and is a priority for us is that in order to protect customers in disadvantaged communities, we're going to have bill caps in place in order to prevent customers from paying more than what they currently do for their HVAC needs. And then something that's also on the top of our minds is that we are exploring project labor agreements, or PLAs, for skilled labor during construction for whichever of our pilot projects will be approved. So the first pilot project I'm going to talk to you about is Mount Vernon, and it is a disadvantaged community in Westchester County. This is our traditional geothermal project. It involves two connected district geothermal loops, and amongst the two loops, there will be over 100 boreholes drilled amongst 3 different bore fields. Up to 76 buildings will connect to these two loops, and they're mostly residential, but there are also other types of buildings like churches, fire station, medical office, and a recreation center. We're going to provide heating, cooling, and/or domestic hot water to all of the customers who sign up. An interesting tidbit about this project is that on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, there's a little segment in green, and that is a section of leak-prone gas pipe that we identified. So if those 9 homes sign on to our pilot project, we will pay to fully electrify them so we can retire up to 500 feet of that leak-prone gas pipe. So in terms of rates, so we are going to have a BTU meter for each customer, and that will measure the amount of thermal energy that's put into or taken out of our U10. And then we will use that reading to bill the customers. So as I said earlier, for residential customers, the rates will be pretty basic. Bill caps will be in place to prevent them from paying more than what they currently do for their HVAC needs. It will vary a little bit for the commercial customers, but we're still in the very early stages for this project. We hired CDM Smith in order to design this project for us, and design officially started in July of this year. So we will figure out, rates will be more concrete within the next couple of months, and definitely before we submit our Stage 2 filings. So next up is our first pilot project that we proposed in Manhattan. It's in Chelsea, which is another disadvantaged community. We hired Ecosystem and their partner AKF to design this project for us, and the total project cost is estimated to be around $92 million. That's for everything, for the whole project lifecycle: design, construction, operation, maintenance, contingency, labor, et cetera. So the thermal energy resource for this project will be a data center and the rest of the commercial office building located at 85 10th Avenue. So we will extract heat from that large building's chilled water plant in the basement from the condenser water, and we're going to put it into our U10. Our U10 will run underground along West 16th Street, and it will be delivered to heat pumps, which is in a new energy center building that we are going to build. And it will provide domestic hot water to 4 New York City Housing Authority or NYCHA buildings on the Fulton Houses campus. And we are also going to provide heating and cooling to one of those buildings. One of the reasons why we're excited about this project is that it's in a pretty great area for, I guess, alternative thermal energy sources other than geothermal. So there's a whole bunch of other data centers in this area that we could expand to in Stage 2 operation for this pilot project. And it's also close by to the Hudson River that we could potentially explore in the future as well. Like Mount Vernon, bill caps will be in place for this pilot project in order to prevent NYCHA from paying more than what it currently does for its HVAC needs and domestic hot water needs for these 4 buildings. And another unique thing about this project is that Con Edison is going to pay the owners of 85 10th Avenue for its waste heat. We're going to measure it with a BTU meter, and then we will develop a new rate for that within the next couple of months in order to compensate them to use their waste heat in our U10. So our last project is in Rockefeller Center. We also hired Ecosystem and AKF to design this for us, and the total project cost is estimated to be around $86 million. So we are going to extract waste heat from Tishman Speye's Rockefeller Center Central Plant's chilled water system. Say that 5 times fast. That's my standard joke whenever I give these presentations. We're going to extract it from the chilled water plant, exhaust heat recovery coils, ice plants, and potentially other sources of heat. We're all going to put that into our U10. And then our U10 is going to provide heating and potentially domestic hot water to the 3 buildings showed on this slide. So we're going to provide heating and potentially domestic hot water to 2 buildings that are also owned by Tishman Speyer, and another building across 6th Avenue owned by Rockefeller Group. So they're going to use large-scale industrial heat pumps in order to connect to our network to convert part of its heating systems from steam to U10. Something unique about this project is that the intention is to eventually, in Stage 2 operation, create a marketplace to exchange waste heat in between buildings. So we would expand it to other nearby buildings, and then those buildings can contribute its waste heat to the U10, and then Con Edison would pay them to use their waste heat for these networks. In terms of rates, so we're also creating brand new rates for our commercial customers, including the rates to pay Tishman Speyer for its waste heat. And another unique item about this project is that there will be some sort of cost sharing amongst our commercial partners for this. So they will contribute an as of yet undetermined portion to help contribute for construction costs for this project. So we're in very early discussions with them, but it's just another thing that sets our pilot projects apart from some of the other pilot projects proposed in New York State. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but this is snippings from UTENJA, and I highlighted words just to demonstrate the importance that our lawmakers placed on job creation and just job security for the natural gas transition. So I highlighted words like prevailing wage rates, apprenticeships, project labor agreements, and labor peace agreements. So it is, Con Edison is exploring project labor agreements for skilled labor to use union workforce during construction. And we are in early talks with the New York State Building and Construction Trades Council in order to facilitate that. And we are looking to continue conversations about that as we get closer to construction. Just because we're still pretty far away for construction. It's estimated to start in 2026. We don't even know which projects will be approved for construction yet. So once we learn more, then we'll engage with them more heavily about PLAs. Another thing that is on the top of our minds is talking to unions to use their existing apprenticeships, just so we can grow that workforce, so we can have more options to choose from for skilled labor during construction. And then, of course, we're going to continue conversations with the Utility Workers Union of America, our local one too, to make sure that they're part of a permanent solution moving forward in order to operate and maintain the U-10s. So that's all I put together for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email's right here. So thanks for having me.
All right, those are tough acts to follow. So my name is Amy Orr. I am a Director of Shareholder Engagement at Boston Common Asset Management. I did not prepare slides for you today. I figured you'd be tired of seeing slides by now, but maybe that was a mistake. We'll see. So Boston Common, just to tell you a little bit about who we are, we're a boutique asset manager founded over 2 decades ago by our founder, Gita Iyer. We've always invested kind of at the intersection between social change and financial return. We don't believe you have to give up one to get the other, and this was long before the letters E, S, and G were a hotly debated acronym. But here we are today, and we still believe that we can invest in innovations like thermal energy networks through a globally diversified portfolio across sectors. And so one of the things I'd like to talk, and we really focus on products, processes, and policies as sort of our 3 Ps in our world. And the innovation of products is incredibly important, but also a lot of the process pieces around workforce and community buy-in that you just heard are also incredibly important to us, and I'll tell you a little bit about why. And then a little bit more about us. We are also proud members of ICCR, and we do use active ownership as a core strategy. We get that no company is perfect. And so we believe that our voice is important as investors, and more important than our voice in some cases, especially with regulated utilities, is the voice of stakeholders who will be impacted, and at the end of the day are the ratepayers that are sort of driving the revenues for these companies. And so as investors, we believe strongly that these voices are incredibly important. So we think about climate change and earth renewal, inclusion and empowerment, and community health and well-being as sort of our 3 driving social factors that we look for, and governance and systems and policies really underpins everything that we do. So utilities are one of a few sectors that we invest in at Boston Common, where we think that they have an incredibly important role to play thematically to address the very real decarbonization need that is needed for our buildings, especially in terms of heating and cooling. Ania mentioned before that occupies sort of around 1/3 of energy-related emissions, and that data point is validated globally as well, while she was showing the US slide by the International Energy Agency's reporting. So it's a very important piece of the puzzle if we care about decarbonizing our systems and our future. And utilities can be an instrumental part of this puzzle, even though so we tend to invest in sort of electric and gas utilities, but we really do believe that these are regulated entities, and so really need to think about this stranded asset concern. So why thermal energy networks? I think if I were just putting my sheer investor hat on, or my investment colleagues at Boston Common would say that they're incredibly concerned about the stranded asset risk. Aging infrastructure is a thing in New York. You don't have to look much further than right behind me at this beautiful fireplace to say we're actually doing things differently today. So investing into these aging infrastructures is probably not a smart investment decision. So when you translate that to gas infrastructure, And when you look at the data that Ania and Brittany presented around, these aging infrastructure where you have these vulnerabilities in gas infrastructure, why don't we think about a technology that could replace that infrastructure rather than investing into something that will soon become obsolete, like the fireplace behind me. So also, we agree that it's a safer and cheaper alternative. While there are other technologies out there that we think are really compelling for other purposes, they may not have the affordability play that we just heard from other panelists. And when a lot of gas utilities in particular are talking about alternative fuels, such as hydrogen and other biofuels, we think that those gases like hydrogen have potentially really interesting potential in industrial processes. We think there's a lot to be determined in terms of how those could be used for heating and cooling our buildings. Won't bore you with details, but others on this panel can say that smaller molecule substance would need very different infrastructure if we're going to pipe it into our homes and offices. So thermal energy networks are sort of giving us a very interesting potential that as an investor we think is something we would love to see more pilots. Probably going a little too fast, but so in terms of the social side and the environmental side, climate, we've seen the case already up here for emissions reduction. We've seen some data to show that the fugitive methane emissions from gas needs to go away for many reasons, both to improve air quality and also to reduce emissions from other sources. One point that I really want to underscore, and is something we look for a lot at Boston Common, is this focus on circularity. So the Chelsea project and potentially tapping into the heat source of data centers, that's really interesting to us because you're sort of solving multiple wicked challenges at once, right? You're capturing potential fugitive emissions from one source and using them to heat another source, and then moving away from the gas infrastructure. So that's really interesting. And then Ania mentioned also the lower grid impact. As social and financial investors, we actually think a lot about sort of the toll that increased transmission need would have on nature and natural ecosystems. And so this idea, this hyper-localized technology is also very compelling because it reduces the need to build in transmission lines and sort of destroy more natural ecosystems that we desperately need to preserve. And then if you think about something like solar, which has, as Pedro knows and he can speak to at length, has an incredible impact on lithium in other countries. We don't have to have that sort of extraction in one place to power another place in this sort of technology. So both community-wise and environmentally, this is a compelling technology. On the community side, I mentioned air quality already. I mentioned sort of the interesting pieces of the puzzle around the hyper-local nature where communities are actually benefiting from the direct technology and the build-out that's happening in their backyard. We think that's super important, and we've seen examples or negative examples, in fact, of utilities bringing in substations to a disadvantaged community with great intention around building out a new electrification system, but where the benefit of that substation is really felt mostly elsewhere. This is not true with this technology, which we think as an investor, again, putting our investor hats on, this reduces the reputational risk associated with the technology, which we think is really, because people really can be involved in the project and they can see the benefit play out in their own backyard. And then finally, workforce. As ICCR knows, we engage heavily on workforce issues because we think that the skills transition that Mike mentioned is incredibly important. We do everything we can to help utilities see that the race to the bottom by way of gig workforce is probably not a smart path forward or not a sustainable path forward. And we think that that's important, and we've seen, frankly, examples of going the non-PLA or non-union route coming back to bite companies, and by way of sort of wage theft lawsuits or class action and higher turnover, higher injury rates. And so we've sort of seen those tensions play out. Well, we understand that there is sometimes a labor shortage that companies talk about that all the time. We think that skills transition is better, as Mike mentioned, if we can focus on unionized labor and really interesting the data around diversity as well. So thank you for presenting that. So, in conclusion, we think that this is an interesting technology that needs more piloting. Geothermal as a technology is sort of already proven, but networked thermal energy networks, we think, require more piloting. And we're excited to see these pilots pan out that have been presented today to really help us understand their full potential. And we think, again, underpinning everything is good governance and strong stakeholder feedback loops. And we think that at the end of the day for utilities, those are more important than ever. We think they're always important, but more important than ever because these communities and workers are ratepayers at the end of the day. So they're really going to have a meaningful impact on a utility's ability to sustain itself. And I'll end there, but look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Yes, well, it has been a great panel. It has been awesome to be the moderator because you stick just to the time. So that was amazing. Thank you for that. Not the usual thing when you moderate. So please now, all the speakers go to our chairs and feel free to also put the mics on, the lapel mics. And I need now Chris' help to bring the mic to the people answering the questions. And also, Jess, thank you. You are receiving the questions on the Zoom. Do we have one already? Or please raise your hand or think on the questions that you would like to bring to our panelists. I don't know if anyone has already a question in mind. Otherwise, I can break the ice. Please. And also remember to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you so much for this panel. I'm Jeff Bromagem, Gas Leaks Project. So this is great. Pilot projects. My mind is, how do we get from pilot to scale? So I guess my question for the panel is, do the utilities here have an incentive to do these projects at least cost and prove that there's a future here? I don't ask this to pick on Con Ed at all. I really mean that as a question for everyone, because at the end of the day, this is only going to go somewhere if we can prove that it's competitive, cost competitive. So that's my question. Thank you.
I'll go first. Con Ed's used to being picked on, so it's okay. So yeah, I mean, these are pilot projects. Cost is going to be more than what it normally would be because we're testing out new things. So one of the purpose of these pilot projects is to figure out a more cost-effective way to do things in the future. I mean, we're 100% keeping costs in mind because we don't want electric ratepayer funds to be unnecessarily impacted. We're trying to make sure that this is a cost-effective way to help electrify. But, the nature of pilot projects is that they're more costly than what they would be after we gather our learnings. So the purpose of these pilot projects are to gather as much learnings as we can in order to simplify these things and to make them better in the future.
And I don't know if this is working. Are you all hearing me? The other thing is that thermal energy networks are not given as a monopoly, so there's going to be competition, so that can also drive costs. In addition, the pilots, HEAT is working with the national labs and many universities in Massachusetts to track everything associated with these pilots, and so cost is one of the factors, but also how do you design these? And that first project that happened, we are already looking at the second and can see already where there can be cost savings. And the second project that will be connected to that first loop is coming in at half the cost. So I think that there's a ton of learning. We're at the very beginning of the cost curve, and there's a ton of learning. But between regulation and competition and these mandates, these state mandates to decarbonize, the utilities are going to have a lot of incentive to have to go this route.
Does anyone else from the panel want to add something up? Otherwise, we can go to the next question. I think there was a question here. Chris, if you can help me.
All right.
Go first. Yeah.
Since I was closer to the mic, Eduardo Cortez is my name. I have a small investment company, and these issues are very important for us. One of my questions, probably Brittany, you may be the most appropriate, but I think all of you, you showed us that slide with the steps and the regulations, and we're talking about carbon neutrality in somewhere between 2030 and 2050. You're starting your first pilot in 2026, and we're not going to begin to see results from that till 2030 something. I'm thinking a little bit like the question that came from behind me. How do we get this technology and this exciting opportunity to a scale that it's really making a difference?
So totally understand your point. We're not going to operate in a silo. We're going to have to make regularly metrics reporting to the Public Service Commission, and all of our reports are public. So anyone can subscribe to our case number, and you can follow along in order to see what our metrics are. So one of the metrics are, like electricity consumption compared to other alternatives like air source heat pumps, how like customer satisfaction, complaints. There's a whole list. The Public Service Commission just published a list of proposed metrics that all utilities would have to follow for its pilot projects. So I think if you look at those metrics, you'll kind of have a better idea of what utilities will report on during our pilot projects, and it'll give you more confidence to see if you think these are viable to invest in the future once they're in operation. So you won't have to wait until 2032 to figure it out.
And can I just add, we tried not to call them pilots, but demonstrations, because the technology is actually works. These are live in college campuses across the country. They work perfectly. So the question is, can utilities do them too? So they are about demonstrating, can a utility do it? One of the things we have to do is pass legislation that takes down some of the barriers associated with building these out. And there are many of them, and I think that's what sort of the BDC is really good at, is working with all of the stakeholders to figure out how do we take down the barriers so that we can speed up and scale this as fast as possible.
I can just add, in our future gas docket in Rhode Island, that is a main question: is how do we break down the barriers where we have this existing institutionalized system that's been around for a century or so, more than that, to make sure that we are doing it in a cost-effective way, that we are making sure that this is the future, and that we are making sure that we're putting in the right policy so that the utility sees the signals to continue building it out.
I'll add something else. So utility thermal energy networks are called district energy systems elsewhere in the world, so they're not really new. We personally, our team went to Vancouver to see like 8+ installations that have been in service for over 5 years. So if you look to Canada and Europe, you'll find a whole bunch of other examples of these district energy systems that are already in operation. So you can kind of talk to people to gather more learnings on your end too.
And then I would just add that from a shareholder engagement and investor standpoint, I think we're often asking questions about CapEx, how companies are spending their CapEx, and what is the percentage of the spend that's going toward projects like this relative to gas repairs. That's not going to get us to scale faster, I hear you, but I think just constantly nudging around sort of what are the actions that are following some of these commitments, and how do we better understand how utilities are sort of allocating those dollars that are passed through to ratepayers in terms of who's paying for them. And so we think it's really important just to continue to ask those questions, really underscores our interest in sort of using our active voice as shareholders. And then the other piece of the puzzle that I don't know if any of us are really equipped to answer is sort of really thinking through the messaging hurdle. I work for Boston Common, but I actually live in Brooklyn. And like, how do you get over, if a geothermal project comes to my neighborhood, how do you educate people about this technology? And I think Con Ed and some organizations are doing a great job at this, but would you even know to go to their website as a citizen that isn't an investor? And I do think there's a hurdle there that probably can be easily overcome, but we need more players in the room to really think about that messaging with ratepayers.
Thank all of you. I will just add that this is a call to action, this event. So by itself, we need to, start working on promoting and advocating for this technology and this type of projects. Chris, can you help me here? This, you have been waiting, sorry for that. Now it's your turn, finally.
It's okay, thanks. Yeah, so I was just interested in some of the information you put up about some of the heat sources and the data centers specifically. My understanding is that if you do have like a source that's expelling heat, like a data center or a grocery store, or maybe maybe even a movie theater that's air conditioning a lot, then that can help, to balance out to provide the heat source. But also like in a dense environment like New York, this can be really expensive to do because where do you do your staging? And I'm just wondering, how that density provides a tailwind and a headwind if you do have like all these supermarkets and all these data centers in a small area, but then you also have that challenge of, drilling in a dense urban environment. How do those, have you started to think about how those balance out and that sort of thing?
That's definitely something to think about in the future. After we, if we decide as Con Edison we want to pursue this as a business area in the future, or if the state requires to do this in the future, we had a very limited amount of time to pick our pilot projects. So we kind of issued an RFI, and then we picked whatever we thought would generate the most learnings from the state. But our 2 Manhattan projects for sure will test out the cost effectiveness and just the availability of waste heat in a centralized area compared to other areas of the country where it's spread out more. Manhattan is definitely its own unique little niche, and we'll learn more after our pilot projects to kind of give you a better answer in the future.
Right there. Is it working?
Hello? Yeah. All right, great. I'm Paul Westin from the Swedish Energy Agency, a country which has a lot of district energy networks. I really enjoyed your presentations. And I had a question regarding the transfer of skills when it comes to the pipes. I understand, of course, that it might seem that steel would be the option, but when you have these low temperature loops, 4th generation district energy networks with heat pumps, you can actually, and we've seen that in Europe, use plastic pipes, which would lower costs significantly.
These are HDPE pipes. These
Yeah.
are plastic pipes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And I want to just tell a story that I didn't, 12 minutes is very short, which is that the gas workers installed the pipes in the Framingham pilot. And what was really interesting is that usually it's mom and pop shops who do geothermal. And so the gas workers brought all of their quality control measures into the project. And so on those gas pipes, they put, for example, they would mark the pipes with the date and who did it, and so that they could have quality control. So it's actually, we're also going to have the gas workers teaching the industry on quality, which is kind of fun.
And the gas workers that are, for example, Rhode Island is replacing 60 miles of pipe this year, and they're replacing it with that same material that would be used for these thermal energy networks. That PVC plastic you're talking about is actually the next sort of material they're using to replace our old leaky 100-plus-year-old pipes that old metal corroded material.
great, you thought about everything, thanks.
I'll pose a question from the Zoom. Has any data been collected or published yet on job creation associated with the demonstration projects, or the number of workers or types of workers that it takes to construct a U-10?
So we're currently in design. So we will look into exploring that, and I'm sure that will be some sort of metric we'll have to report on when our pilot projects are constructed, but it's too early right now. We're only designing our projects right now.
And there are several studies that are looking into this, and we'll hopefully be coming out with data soon. And for the second project that Eversource is doing, they will be reporting, I think on Monday, we're going to be getting the numbers for what their projections are.
Do we have another question on the Zoom? No? There's so much.
Hi, my name is François Meloche with Equo, shareholder engagement service provider based in Montreal. Just a quick question. I just wonder, with all the politics, perhaps, if you're seeing any concern by industry, certain, I'm thinking of utilities that may also have midstream pipelines, transmission, that might see this as a threat by, just by the sole fact that it's reducing demand for gas. Maybe there's no answer, but I'm just wondering, because we're in Canada, there is a little bit of that going on as well. So any thoughts on this?
So, I have heard that utilities are actually concerned about the decrease in throughput and the decrease in customers, because if you have less customers on a system and you're actually investing money in that system, that's a big problem. So we've actually heard the opposite, which is utility companies are aware, and we have 11 states that have future of gas dockets open, saying like you have to figure out what you're going to do with your gas because the current model doesn't work. So for you to meet, we have to have you meet our targets. And so I think right now we're at the utilities are really curious stage. Is that fair?
I'm sure someone in Con Ed is thinking about this. But my team, we're required by law, we have to do these pilot projects. If I can find out a better answer for you if you email me later, but off the top of my head, I can't give you any more information.
I think you're asking about political barriers too, right?
Yeah, and if you're seeing any lobbying against those measures, against those...
Yeah, I can speak for climate jobs where, these kinds of things are involving all of us, right? So, we've done amazing things through our coalition. I am going to toot our horn for a second. We've been able to pass some really incredible legislation, but it's only because of the cross-sectoral partnerships that we have involved in our coalition, from environmental groups, from the business community now, from the labor community. Everyone is working hand in hand, knowing that we have this challenge in front of us and agreeing that it's a challenge and putting the values first to make the change happen. And we're leaning into that with our gas dockets. And I can say the same thing for each of the climate jobs coalitions that we work with across the country and our other states.
Do you want to say something, Amy? No. Okay, you
Go
have
ahead.
a question?
Good.
Chris, can you?
Thanks very much. It was a great panel. So my question really has to do with geographical location, and if you can say anything about, whether there are parts of the United States, since that's all we're talking about here today, where this is, more appropriate. Can it be used in the Deep South? Can it be used primarily for cooling rather than primarily for heating? Because I know the Falcon curve has to do with heating, and you might want to talk about that a little bit, Ania.
So yeah, these exist across the country from Texas. They have lots in Canada, so definitely in the cold it makes a lot of sense, but also there are several projects, and not utility projects, but in Florida and in Texas. I just heard that there's a really great one in Nassau, the island. So I think it is a good point, which is that temperature is going to matter, and it gets back to the economics of it. So what are the economics are going to matter, and the more the difference between the heating and the ground temperature, like if it's super hot or super cold, and particularly if it's super hot and super cold, the economics are going to change. And so some places these will make more sense than others, but from a geology perspective, you can practically do these anywhere. In Massachusetts, we had a feasibility study, and 90% of Massachusetts was suitable for this. And so I think we have to look and see what happens going forward. But I think people are exploring it all over the world. And the World Bank is really interested in this. So they reached out to HEAT, and they are interested in this for all of the countries that are worried about gas, particularly Russian gas. And so Turkey, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, and then we had that Ukraine coalition. And Ukraine is really interested both because of the gas, but also because they want to rebuild their country in a way that is going to be safe going forward.
We have lots of questions on Zoom. So I'm going to combine two that are similar. One, these are both about gas pipelines. And one is, are there any projects converting existing gas pipelines for use in U10, so lined pipe? And how does gas pipe decommissioning work alongside the need for increased electricity generation and supply? So rising energy.
I can take a stab at the first part of that question. So did you ask if anyone was looking at reusing existing gas pipe for U10s?
Yeah, that's what the question asks.
Oh, okay. So I think it would just depend upon, the quality of the pipe, how old it is, and then the parameters of the system. We're not looking at that right now just because, we want to limit the amount of new things that we test, but we can think about it in the future. That certainly has been a question posed to us before, but that's not something we're examining as part of our pilot projects.
It is definitely feasible to do, and it comes down to safety. Especially with the pipes that are being replaced now with that same material, that it can have, it was a 10-year lifetime projection to be used for that purpose, or a mixed fuels purpose. But you can sort of transfer that purpose, but only for a limited time, depending on the quality and the age of the pipe. What was the second part of the question?
The second part is, how does gas pipe decommissioning work with the need to have increased electricity generation and supply? So I wonder if it's at the broader energy demand.
Yeah, that's a great question that I don't have the technical expertise to know, but it is a question we've been asking in our future gas docket. And we've been thinking about it in if you think about the main pipe being sort of the trunk of a tree and then branching out, thinking about exactly the geographic location of those branches and how you transition those in segments. And thermal energy networks are the best way to kind of transition those segments off of the gas system into an electrified system to meet our Act on Climate goals in Rhode Island, for example. And that's one way that we're looking at that.
And thermal energy networks also are projected to use less electricity consumption as opposed to other electrification methods like air source heat pumps. So that'll help with the increased electricity demand in the future.
And a fun fact on the Framingham project is that the total use of electricity for all of those buildings actually went down. So the electricity demand for that neighborhood will be less after the geothermal pilot is put in than before. And the reason why is because a bunch of the buildings had resistance heat, which is incredibly inefficient.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation and a good panel discussion. How does the calculation look for the users, the homeowners and the commercial property owners adopting this technology compared to maybe a standalone heat pump solution? And the second question is, have you seen any hurdles on the distribution systems in properties in your pilots? I mean, we are talking about how to apply the energy, but inside the buildings, I mean, adopting from gas to heat pump technology.
You go first.
So it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And it's going to be a big challenge whether it's air source or ground source or whatever. Big difference if you have a utility paying for the infrastructure is that the utility is paying for it versus the homeowner. So particularly if you had geothermal, homeowner for geothermal is going to be $30,000. So this is a way to get that service without having to pay for the infrastructure. But inside the home, it really depends on what you have. So if you have central air, it's really easy to plug in. If you have if you have resistance heat, you have to put in a whole new system. If you have steam, it's a little more complicated. So it depends on what's in the house, but we're going to have to deal with that no matter how you decarbonize. So whether it's with network geothermal systems or with air source heat pumps, we're going to have to deal with that.
As part of our pilot projects, we're going to have to perform a life cycle analysis to compare the cost and electricity savings and other parameters with other electrification methods like air source heat pumps. So we're currently waiting on some more guidance from our regulators as to what we should consider and what methods we should use in our life cycle analyses. So to be determined. Watch our public docket for more information.
Over there.
Thank you. Thanks so much for this really interesting discussion. Sarah O'Brien from European Climate Foundation. I had a question about consumer protection with thermal energy networks. Anya, you just said that these are not monopolies, and I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that. How do they operate?
Well, there hasn't been a decision to, so utilities are monopolies. The ownership structures and models have not been determined by the commissions in these states in terms of like who can and can't own them. In New York, and I would say New York, Maryland, Washington, they've said that gas and electric companies can own and operate. In Maryland, gas, electric, and water can own and operate, but they haven't said that someone else can't operate in their territory. So there's going to, like if the water utility has a network in the same place as a gas utility, there may be some competition.
But once the network is established, is that not then a monopoly?
So once I think the network is established, I think it's going to belong to whoever has it, and then you're going to want to connect to that network and potentially buy or sell energy to that network. If you are, I mean, I can see a future where there's a thermal market, kind of like they're doing with the data center, where you can buy the energy or sell energy. There's a really interesting pilot that, for example, in Troy, New York, that's being proposed with National Grid, where the city of Troy would own the boreholes and sell the energy to National Grid, and National Grid would only have the distribution pipe. So it's very similar to like buying gas, but they would be buying the energy from the city who would own the boreholes. So like all of that is still being worked out, and so that's where I'm saying like there's going to be, it's going to be further defined, and there will be competition ahead. Electric munis are asking me, can we do these? And so that would be another potential group that would come in and do this.
Yeah, I'll just add, like, you know, in Rhode Island, I'm not going to speak which ones, but there are a few municipalities that are looking at publicly owning their own thermal energy networks, especially in certain areas where it's hard to decarbonize or, you know, power their own facilities.
We have more questions on Zoom.
We have more on Zoom. This is for you, Brittany. But Amy, I wonder if you could also speak to this broadly from your community experience. The question is, for Con Ed, what has been the response of Wall Street investors to Con Ed's expansion into thermal energy networks?
So these are pilot projects right now, so we're not looking for investors at the moment. I mean, 100% we want to know whoever's interested, so if we're able to expand in the future and propose new pilot projects, we're 100% in learning more information, but we're waiting for future guidance from the state before we make any more moves.
Yeah, and I would just say that I'm not sure if Boston Common can speak for all of Wall Street, but we do believe that some of the risks presented here are risks that a lot of investors think about, right? And so the reputational risk, sort of the regulatory risk, you know, in many cases the regulator is defining the climate objectives and the utility is sort of implementing those objectives. And so, you know, I think investor-owned utilities sometimes get a bad rap because, you know, the investor is taking essentially a piece of the pie of what was, you know, historically has been a fully regulated and state-owned entity. But at the same time, as an investor, we look at utilities as like we're not looking at tech returns, right? We're looking at very stable income in diversified portfolios. And so that's sort of an important note to keep in mind, that how are these utilities both solving the challenge for those of us who care about the challenge ahead of us, and also how are they mitigating risks while doing this? And so a lot of the things around workforce risk and, you know, risk of aging infrastructure and stranded assets, this is language that is spoken by Wall Street, right? It's not just those who care about the social environmental thesis as well. So just a couple of thoughts there. But.
Thank you, Amy. There's another question here.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that one specifically. have you thought about like the capital intensiveness of operating a U10 versus operating a gas system? Because I think like when I see, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Tom DeChristopher. I'm the gas utilities reporter from S&P Global Commodity Insights. When you, don't let them know you're a journalist. I'm just kidding. Because when I see like a pension fund or like an investment fund buy a gas utility, a lot of times they're saying like these are capital intensive assets. They're going to be investing in these systems. I've talked to portfolio managers who say like, listen, if gas utilities stop having their accelerated pipeline replacement programs, they are inherently less valuable to us as investors. That's just a kind of set it and forget it program. So I'm just wondering how you guys have thought about this, about, you know, what is the transferability of like the capital intensiveness of operating a U10 versus a capital intensiveness of operating a, you know, gas transportation system?
I love your question because we have talked so much about this. So please, I don't know, Amy, if you want to go first, and then or
you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very valid point, right? I think, and if my investment colleagues were here, they would they would definitely articulate like what is the way that an investor does actually seek those stabilized returns. I think that we tend to sort of balance the two, right? The stranded asset piece that I was talking about versus the capital intensivity of the, and that's why we think that these may not be the be-all end-all solution, but we think it's definitely worth piloting, right? And so there's still more to learn from these pilots. But it's, again, relative to replacing and doing strategic repairs on gas pipes, which are also capital intensive and have all these added risks. You know, we're always balancing those two pieces of the puzzle. But Anya, you should speak to
I think that we're trying to also legislatively, for example, say you can do accelerated cost recovery by replacing leaky gas pipe instead of with gas pipe with a thermal network pipe. And so if you can start allowing the gas utilities to benefit from that replacement, then there could be a benefit, right? Versus staying on the gas system. There's also like the idea, can we increase the revenue cap for like how much gas companies can, right now they have a revenue cap for how much they can replace every year for accelerated recovery. Can we increase that for gas utilities, for installing thermal networks as a way to be able to have this return for constructing thermal networks instead of just adding or continuing to invest in gas infrastructure?
So I know this.
Sorry, go ahead.
I know this won't give you an immediate answer, but in terms of operating and maintaining U10s, that will most likely be one of the metrics we'll have to report upon once our pilots are constructed and are operating during the 5 years. So during one of our required updates, I don't know if it'll be monthly or quarterly, that's still to be determined. But if you can look at our publicly filed metrics once they're in operation in a couple years to get better data from Con Ed.
And can I just ask Mike one quick follow-up question? Thanks. How are gig workers moving into and displacing utility workers or union workers?
Another great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I'll give an example where so utility workers are fine because they already operate under existing agreements with the utility. But when we're talking about solar developers that are upstarting, for example, we need to be careful of solar developers that get into the market and then pulling from communities just for $15 an hour jobs, which they are some are trying to do. And so that is the risk of this quick transition where people are getting excited about, new players in the renewable energy market who are offering, all of these great, wonderful things to, communities where they can't fully deliver. And people are getting left, without a job once a project is complete, for example. We can't have that, and then you go into unscrupulous practices where people are misclassified as contractors, for example, and not getting, then they have to pay their own taxes at the end of the year, and they don't know that. So there are very high risks in terms of we'll call them, some of the startup community, but also some of the others that might be coming into this, from a different angle. Into this industry, seeing it, people are investing in renewable energy, but then they're not fully meeting their requirements of actually, benefiting the community that they claim to serve.
And I guess we have time for one last question. If there's anything on the Zoom, do we have? And then we can wrap up.
Hello. What are some lessons learned from other similar geo or district energy situations where the customer is also the provider? What strategies are being considered to manage these potentially more complex contractual relationships?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry. That was a lot of words.
Yeah. Are there any lessons learned from other similar situations, it could be geothermal or district energy, where the customer is also the provider of energy in some way? And what strategies are being considered to manage these potentially more complex contractual relationships?
Yes.
The data center. So we are in constant contact with Eversource about their Framingham project. So Eric is always very willing to share any lessons learned that he has from design, and now that they're operating, I'm sure he'll give us regular updates about any lessons learned there. We've also talked to some Vancouver District Energy System designers, and we actually have the designer of some district energy systems in Vancouver as our owner's rep. So we will be able to use any of past lessons learned from their experience, so we can apply that to our own systems, so we won't make any potential blunders that we could have avoided elsewise.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you all, the panelists. I just want to share that for all of us at work in this, we see it definitely as an essential part of just transition. And when we talk about a just transition, it's a rough path. It's a tough process. And that's why we have to have these conversations. It has been like maybe a technical conversation going specifically into the details of policy, of projects, of investment tools. But that's the type of conversation that we want to create at ICCR. And definitely it has been wonderful for me to moderate this event. And thank you all for being here. And also thank you for our great panelists. And I just want to ask you for another round of applause so we can.